In early September 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat initiated a crackdown against Islamist activists, with mass arrests of over 1,500 people. After some pushback, there was a hastily organised referendum which massively endorsed the crackdown with a reported 99.5% approval vote. A group opposed to the deployment of American cruise missiles in the UK set up a permanent camp outside one of the bases where they were stored, RAF Greenham Common in Berkshire. The camp was initiated by a feminist group, Women for Life on Earth, and while the camp at Greenham Common became a nexus for the disarmament movement and other related left-wing political positions, it never lost its character as primarily a women's effort, and the Greenham Common women were frequently seen on the news throughout the 1980s as they put together massive group actions, including ringing the entire base perimeter with an estimated 30,000 women linking hands. And the qualification tournament for next year's World Cup in Spain were coming to a close. England had not successfully qualified for a World Cup since 1962, having qualified automatically as hosts in 1966 and as holders in 1970, then failed to make the cut in 1974 and 78. England had stuttered a little in the 1980-81 tournament, with away defeats in Bucharest and Basel, but a win against lowly Norway would help their cause immensely. There was no professional league in Norway at the time, and English football was widely followed, and its players were well known and idolised, so when the game finished 2-1 to Norway, commentator Bjørge Lillelien got a little emotional in a clip that's rarely played in its entirety, so here's the whole thing.
Vi best I verden! Vi har slått England 2-1 I fotball! Det aldeles utrolig! Vi har slått England! England, kjempers fødeland! Lord Nelson, Lord Beaverbrook, Sir Winston Churchill, Sir Anthony Eden, Clement Attlee, Henry Cooper, Lady Diana. Vi har slått dem alle sammen. Vi har slått dem alle sammen. Maggie Thatcher, can you hear me? Maggie Thatcher, jeg har et budskap til deg midt under valgkampen. Vi har et budskap til deg. Vi har slått England ut av verdensmesterskapet I fotball, Maggie Thatcher. Og som de sier på ditt språk, I boksebarene rundt Madison Square Garden I New York. Your boys took a hell of a beating. Your boys took a hell of a beating. For Maggie Thatcher, Norge har slått England I fotball. De best I verden.
As I record this on the morning of Monday the 6th of July 2026, Norway and England yesterday won their respective games in this year's World Cup to set up a quarter-final meeting, the first ever between the two at a major tournament, so I'm sure we'll all be hearing a lot more of that clip in the days to come. And since I know I have some viewers in Brazil, condolencias. The F1 circus returned to Monza after a year away. The 1980 Italian Grand Prix had taken place at Imola, while the Monza circuit was upgraded. The circuit at Monza was built in 1922 in the park of the Royal Villa of Monza, built by the Habsburgs in the 18th century, but the Italian royals had rather gone off the place after King Umberto I was assassinated there in 1900. As anyone who watched last summer's diversion into 1931, and, if you're watching this in the future, the two-parter on 1932 from this summer, will know Italy was at the forefront of motor racing during the 1930s, taking over from France as the dominant nation thanks, in no small part, to the influence of the fascist government which regarded sporting excellence, particularly in cutting-edge technological sports such as car and aircraft racing, as a way of demonstrating the superiority of their ideology. The original circuit used in the early 30s combined the dogleg layout we're familiar with today with a high-speed loop which crossed the modern track on a bridge. A horrific accident in 1933 led to the high-speed loop being abandoned until after the war. The combined circuit was used again in 1955 and 56, and in 1960 and 61, but after that the banked corners of the oval were considered too dangerous for Formula One cars, despite the depiction of an accident on the banking in 1966's movie Grand Prix. In 1972, chicanes were added partway along the main straight, Rettifilo, and one at the Curva Vialone, and another was added on the approach to the tricky double apex Curva di Lesmo in 1976, but Monza remains a temple of speed and the home of Italian motorsport. The Ferrari faithful were as ever packed into Monza to support the prancing horse, and they had a new hero, Gilles Villeneuve, who had wrestled the ill-handling Ferrari to 2 wins so far in 1981, and despite their awful recent form, hopes were high for a good showing here from Il Grande Villeneuve. Even though Jody Scheckter had won a World Championship with Ferrari just 2 years earlier, he'd still never quite gained the level of adulation that the fans were reserving for the flamboyant driving of the Piccolo Canadese. There was another Ferrari hero here in Monza too, Niki Lauda, who was spotted deep in conversation with Ron Dennis, Teddy Mayer and John Hogan of Marlboro. But he also maintained links with Parmalat and good relations with Bernie Ecclestone, so despite having rather flounced out of Brabham at the end of 1979, there was also a possibility he might be tempted back there, especially as Bernie was reputed to be worried that Nelson Piquet could be poached by Ferrari or even Ligier. With Lauda Air in need of a cash injection, the decision would probably come down to money, though Niki was keen to say that he was mainly interested in just having some fun again. There were few major changes to the cars from Zandvoort, though Azella had some new bodywork, the whole car now designed by Giorgio Valentini. Gerard Ducarouge continued to work on the Alfa 179, but there was no sign of the promised turbo-engine carbon fibre chassis demonstrator. Maurice Philippe had heavily modified the Tyrrell 011 with a longer wheelbase and redesigned suspension. Over at Williams, Alan Jones had a broken finger and some bruises after getting into a fight in London over a difference of opinion on driving manners in traffic, as Dennis Jenkinson put it in Motorsport magazine. Even so, he was looking happier than Carlos Reutemann, who'd seen his considerable championship lead evaporate and was being pressed by Frank Williams to sign a contract extension. Carlos had no desire to be number 2 to Jones again, but didn't seem to have many other options, and there were a lot of people who were expecting him to announce his retirement at the end of the season, especially if Williams refused him equal billing. He was at least cheered up a little bit by the attendance at the race of Juan Manuel Fangio, Argentina's hero and something of a mentor to Reutemann. Once again, the Renaults were the cars to beat in qualifying, topping Friday's timing sheets with Reutemann 3rd and Piquet 4th, then Villeneuve in the Turbo Ferrari, while at the other end of the grid, Henton had looked good in the new lightweight Tolman until it broke and he had to switch to the old heavier one and finish the day 25th. The new Ozella, meanwhile, was having the usual teething problems, Enzo himself rolling his sleeves up and getting his hands oily, while De Cesaris had his 19th crash of the season, and there were mutterings in the team about just cutting their losses and trying to find a local pay driver for the last 2 flyaway rounds. Pironi crashed too, to be fair, demolishing his Ferrari at the Lesmos and bruising a rib. Saturday's session, like Friday's, took place under cool grey skies. Tombe had been faster than Lafitte in the previous day's session, so the Ligier team management had decided that the drivers would swap cars for Saturday, given Lafitte was still in the title hunt, though what Patrick thought of that is not recorded. The McLaren team had rebuilt De Cesaris' car and, to the surprise of some, he was allowed to take it out and completed 22 laps without incident. There was plenty of incident at Ferrari again. They'd brought 2 spare cars, one each, but Pironi was qualifying in his already after having demolished his main car on Friday, and when he came in saying he was getting engine vibrations, the team gave him Villeneuve's spare, so when the Canadian came in a cloud of turbocharger smoke, he found there wasn't a car to go out in and he had to sit out the rest of the session. When the session ended, Arnoux was unassailable on pole, but it was Carlos Reutemann in second place, 2 men with a lot to prove on the front row, and Prost pushed down to 3rd, but still 6/10 ahead of 4th placed Lafitte. Jones overcame not only the pain from his arm, but a blown engine that left him stranded at the far end of the track for much of Saturday to line up a very creditable 5th alongside Piquet. Watson was 7th, qualifying in the spare McLaren, then Pironi in the first Ferrari, nudging Villeneuve down to 9th using the Canadian's own car. It was thin gruel for the local fans, though Bruno Giacomelli took a certain amount of pride in being the top Italian driver, a couple of 10ths ahead of De Angelis. Mansell was next, then Andretti, who'd been given an experimental new engine modification which hadn't really worked. 3 drivers suffering from being definitely out of favour with their team, Tombe, Rebecca and De Cesaris, came next, followed by Chiva, who seemed to have been G'd up a bit by being beaten by Alboreto on Avon tyres on Friday. Among the usual backmarker pack were Patrese, deeply unhappy with both his Pirelli tyres and the Arrows' new skirt mounting, which he thought was making the car heavier. And in 24th place was a delighted Brian Henton, getting a Tolman onto the grid for the very first time. Brian, Alex Hawkridge and the team were visited by a number of other team owners and grandees to congratulate them as they were packing up, though the Theodore team lodged a protest against Henton's car, saying its skirt mounting was illegal. While Sura had finished the day 25th after being a safe 20th on Friday, and it was understandable that the team had to do the best for their driver, the protest didn't win them many friends in the paddock, especially as Tolman had sportingly withdrawn a car in Belgium to allow Theodore to enter when the maximum entry size had been an issue. In any case, the protest was thrown out and Henton would take the start, though there were a few worried faces when he didn't reappear at the end of Sunday's warm-up, but he'd only missed a braking point and ended up in a sand trap and the car was fine. Juan Manuel Fangio recently turned 70, went out for a few demonstration laps in the Alfa Romeo 159, which he'd won the title in 30 years earlier, and 72-year-old Luigi Villaresi also did some laps in a Lancia D50, and then this year's models went out onto the grid. The weather was looking distinctly autumnal. It was drizzling, there were umbrellas out, and the air was very close, and there was a feeling there might be a thunderstorm in the offing. Just before the start, Jean-Marie Balestre went out and announced that if there was a pile-up at the start, there would not be a red flag and a restart, and that the driver or drivers responsible would be punished severely. Everyone understood that was aimed at Gilles Villeneuve following his spectacular shunt at Zandvoort and a couple of other start line prangs earlier in the year, but memories of Ronnie Peterson's accident 3 years earlier, in a huge start line accident at Monza, did make it sound a very callous announcement. They all went off for the formation lap. Well, 23 of them did anyway. Alboretto's throttle linkage stuck and he would start from the pits. Reutemann had actually got ahead of the Renaults and led the pack all the way round before Arnoux retook his position as they rolled onto the grid. From the start, Prost got away well, again using the softer tyres, and got ahead of Reutemann, then went inside Arnoux to take the lead into the Rettifilo, while it was Pironi's turn to get a great start in the Ferrari to leap up to fourth. Reutemann, running very little wing, got ahead of Arnoux in the Curva Grande, then Pironi was passed too, and to a great cheer from the fans, Didier was then up into second as they braked for Ascari. Further back, Jones, running more wing, anticipating rain, elbowed his way past Lafitte at the same spot, so at the end of that lap, Prost led from Pironi, then Reutemann, Arnoux, Piquet and Jones in the top 6, and Lafitte, Villeneuve, Giacomelli and De Angelis in the top 10. Prost was already pulling away, while behind Pironi everyone was ducking and weaving, overtaking and being overtaken. Piquet dropped back 2 places during the second lap, and Jones dropped behind Villeneuve. But to no one's great surprise, after the last couple of races, Pironi was holding Reutemann and the rest up, and allowing Prost to charge off into a commanding lead. At the start of lap 4, Arnoux, whose harder tyres were starting to get up to temperature, took third from Reutemann, while Rebacke, who'd come in at the end of the parade lap with a rough-sounding engine, had had it tinkered with and was sent back out, parked it out on the track, the ignition dead. Next time around, Arnoux pulled out and outpowered Pironi down the straight to take second place, while unseen Lafitte had got ahead of Reutemann as they came round the Parabolica, and on the next lap it was his turn to get alongside Pironi and take the place to go up to third. As Reutemann set about trying to get past Pironi again, behind him Villeneuve was leading Giacomelli, Jones and Piquet until his turbocharger blew at Ascari in a cloud of smoke and he limped back to the pits. As Prost went through, his gap back to Arnoux now about 5 seconds but getting narrower. While the cameras were watching a huge scrum surrounding Villeneuve's car in the pits, Reutemann got past Pironi while Giacomelli dropped behind both Jones and Piquet. Lafitte, meanwhile, was suffering from a slow puncture and lost third to Reutemann before being swarmed by Pironi, Jones and Piquet as lap 9 began, the Australian also nipping past Pironi into fourth and Piquet following suit further round the lap. At the end of lap 11 then, the positions were Prost leading Arnoux by 5.6 seconds, then Reutemann another 6 seconds back, Jones a couple of seconds behind his teammate, Piquet 5th, Pironi 6th, Giacomelli and Watson 7th and 8th, and Daly going really well up to 9th as Lafitte continued dropping back, now 10th. Mansell had also been dropping back and came into the pits to have a damaged side skirt replaced. Just about then it started raining, but only on the Parabolica corner, sending Slim Borgard slithering off into the sand. Jacques Lafitte was also walking away from his car, though in his case it was his tyre which had finally given way. And unseen in among all of that, Jones had got past Reutemann. Lap 13 and Prost was among the first of the backmarkers, Henton and then Cheever, who'd got away slowly with a sticking throttle. It was visibly wet now at the Parabolica, a tricky corner at the best of times, and Daly had a spin that got going again, though dropping back to 13th. But as Arnoux came to lap Cheever, the Tyrrell also spun across his bows and Rene went onto the sand avoiding him, all of which occurred at a blind spot in the camera coverage. Cheever spent some time trying to get his car moving again while in a very hairy position before finally giving it up as a bad job, and the marshals were able to get it off the track. Salazar's right rear tyre exploded and dumped him in the gravel at the second chicane, making 5 retirements in the last 3 laps, all of which meant that Prost now led Jones by about 14 seconds, then Reutemann and Piquet in 4th. Giacomelli was on a charge, taking 5th from Pironi, then 4th and 3rd in quick succession as Reutemann struggled for grip with his low downforce setup. Behind them, Tombe was also charging, with plenty to prove as he was now the sole Ligier. He passed Watson, then Pironi, while Reutemann dropped back into the clutches of Andrea de Cesaris and Mario Andretti, who were running 9th and 10th. The rain had stopped again, though it would still be a few laps before a properly dry line through Parabolica had been created, as at the start of lap 19 Tombe pulled out and took 4th off Piquet, with Pironi and Watson queued up behind as they all came round to lap Alboreto. Once through, Pironi pulled out and passed Piquet as they began lap 20, with Tombe now some distance ahead, but as he put pressure on Piquet, Watson got up on the curb in the second Lesmo, spun across the track, went rear first into the opposite Armco and absolutely demolished his MP4, tearing off the whole rear end in a gout of flame as Alboreto took to the grass to avoid him, clouted the barrier in turn and parked up next to the ruined McLaren. Next on the scene was Reutemann, who also went round on the grass, while Andretti went straight on through the smoke and took the place, with De Cesaris behind. As both drivers climbed out unhurt, the marshals cleared what they could of the debris, though nobody seemed particularly minded to slow down for the frantically waved yellows. Tombe, meanwhile, had arrived on Giacomelli's rear wing as both came to lap Jarier in the new Azella. Patrick's excellent race would soon be run. The cameras caught him slowing just before they cut away to interview Riccardo Patrese, who stopped at the dud gearbox a few laps earlier. Tombe's Ligier had run over a bit of sharp carbon fibre debris from Watson's accident and punctured a tyre, and that was that. At half distance then, lap 26, Prost led Jones by 17.7 seconds, with Giacomelli third, another 34 seconds behind, but during that lap he suddenly slowed, his gear selector playing up. Piquet and Pironi took advantage to move up, and Bruno glumly trailed in at the end of the lap. After some fettling he was headed off again in 10th place, and Andretti moved up to 5th, with Reutemann now promoted into the points, though a single point with 4 for Piquet in 3rd would only serve to limit the damage to his title hopes, though Pironi was still very keen to get 3rd off Nelson and get his first Ferrari podium. And then it started raining again, just as Giacomelli came back in, evidently unhappy with the bodge job the Auto Delta mechanics were able to put in for him. After yet more fiddling, he was sent out again in 2nd to last place. The new rain turned out to just be a quick shower, though, and didn't make any difference to the race, as Reutemann, his car working again for him on the drying track, reeled in and passed Andretti for 5th, then set about closing in on Pironi, who'd been left behind by Piquet and was suffering both from the bruised rib he'd acquired in qualifying and a hole in his cockpit bodywork that was blasting him with hot air from the engine. Soon enough, Reutemann was behind the Ferrari, which its occupant, as usual, was making as wide as possible, and eventually, though, the Argentine squeezed through into the Variante della Roggia. Just 10 seconds now separated Reutemann from Piquet, and the Argentine set about closing that down with 3rd place and with it the championship lead at stake. But he was running out of time. It was lap 40 of 52 already, as Andretti came up behind Pironi only for his flywheel to come loose and the American came in to retire, with Elio De Angelis now taking up the chase of the Ferrari. Reutemann was chipping away at Piquet's lead, getting it down to 8 seconds, then 7, before a hurry-up message from the pits meant that Nelson put his foot down and set the fastest lap so far. 2 laps later, Jones broke that to set the fastest lap of the race overall, as he in turn was starting to close the gap to Prost, who was husbanding his car to the end. De Angelis had got past Pironi inside at the Parabolica, but as the race came towards its end, Jones's charge at least came to an end, as his engine had broken a valve spring and he'd had to back off a bit in order to ensure he made it to the end. It was looking, as they came round to start lap 50, as if Reutemann's charge would likewise come to naught. The gap was 4.5 seconds as they went into the last lap. But the race had one more twist to turn, as Piquet's Ford DFV let go as he went into Curva Grande on the very last lap, Reutemann carefully tiptoeing round any oil he might have dropped as he swept past. Prost came home to take his 3rd win. Jones nursed his ailing Williams across the line, and Reutemann took 3rd, pulling over as soon as he crossed the line. De Angelis and Pironi both came past Piquet to take 4th and 5th places, but Piquet did have one stroke of luck, Andrea de Cesaris, the last driver he hadn't lapped, had a puncture and went out on the last lap as well. So Nelson was able to pick up a single point that may yet be vital as the title fight entered its last 2 races. 10 cars had classified finishes, with both Jarier in the New Azella and Henton in the Tolman plugging away to the finish, 2 and 3 laps adrift respectively, but happy to have seen the checkered flag. The Tifosi were politely approving of Prost's win. If an Italian or a Ferrari couldn't win, they'd accept someone putting one over on the English teams. The footage I have cuts out just as Prost threw his victory wreath into the crowd, where it was immediately torn to pieces for souvenirs, as they all waited for Reutemann to take to the podium for a record 44th time. In fact, he didn't. He'd pulled straight off after the finish to go and remonstrate with Frank Williams, who he felt ought to have ordered Jones to slow down in the last laps and allow him to take second place to aid in his title fight. Williams said that, as Jones was still in the fight himself, he refused to take sides, and despite having retaken the lead in the title fight, Carlos left the circuit a very unhappy man. Everyone was pleased to see John Watson none the worse for wear, and the Ulsterman was modestly saying that it wasn't really all that scary and he hadn't even seen the flames. Certainly, everyone was taking note that the whole rear assembly had been torn off, but the carbon fibre monocoque was completely intact. And so, with 2 races to go, the title race was still wide open. Non-finishers Villeneuve and Watson were out of the running now, but while Lafitte had dropped to 5th, he was still only a very achievable 15 points behind Reutemann, with Prost and Jones moving up to 3rd and 4th, equal on points, but Prost with 3 wins to Jones's 1. In the constructors' race, Williams had as good as got their second title sewn up. They would need to fail to score in the last 2 races, while Brabham had 1-2 finishes in both. It seemed pretty improbable, and it looked more likely that Renault would come from behind to nick second from Bernie's team. And then, surprising everyone, a couple of days after the race, Alan Jones announced he would be retiring at the end of the year. While he was still in with a shot of retaining his title, he said he wanted to spend more time with his family back home in Australia, where he'd just bought a farm, and ultimately he just wasn't enjoying it anymore, a combination of bad luck on track, bad relations with Reutemann, and his displeasure at the new regulations and the way F1 was being run. He had signed a pre-agreement with Williams for 1982, but Frank was happy to release him from it. And so they prepared for the last 2 races, beginning with a trip to Gilles Villeneuve's home race at the Ile Notre Dame in Montreal, before the grand finale in Las Vegas.